evening, bonsoir, and welcome to the 2012 Volunteer Service Awards ceremony. Bienvenue à la cérémonie de distinction pour le service bénévole.
My name is Colleen Moran.
And Luc Vincent from the Ontario National Award Secretariat, and we're very pleased to be here this evening in Toronto hosting a second time out of 3 ceremonies.
And tonight we salute many of our friends and neighbors who have offered much to their communities through their many years of continuous service to a single organization.
Ce soir, on vous rend hommage pour vos nombreuses années de service bénévole que vous avez contribué dans votre communauté.
By the end of June, more than 10,000 volunteers will have been recognized. Volunteers like you who have served between 5 and, yes, over 60 years of service with a single organization, and youth volunteers who have dedicated 2 or more years of service.
Et oui, plus de 10 000 bénévoles comme vous seront salués cette année. Nous voulons aussi applaudir les jeunes bénévoles qui œuvrent dans une même organisation depuis au moins de 2 ans.
Youth in particular are vital to the future of volunteerism in Ontario. We encourage our young recipients here tonight to be ambassadors, role models of just how powerful young people can be in effecting change. We also take this opportunity to acknowledge the wonderful contributions of the volunteer organizations from this community and the surrounding area. And the government recognizes how much volunteers contribute to this province and the difference it makes to the quality of life for each and every person touched by the volunteers' kindness.
En Ontario, de tels dons de soi se voient chaque jour. C'est avec plaisir que les bénévoles prêtent assistance aux personnes isolées, en améliorant leur qualité de vie, en réduisant leur fardeau et en mettant plus oreilles dans leur vie, en favorisant leur développement personnel.
Tonight is one of 48 ceremonies that are being held in 35 communities across the province. They began this past March and will conclude at the end of this month. And I believe this is ceremony, I know it, this is ceremony number 44 of 48.
Ce soir, nous sommes ici pour l'une des différentes cérémonies organisées dans 35 communautés à l'échelle de la province.
This is also a very special year highlighting the Queen's Diamond Jubilee with international celebrations throughout 2012, marking the 60th anniversary of the reign of Queen Elizabeth. Ontario will mark this milestone by honoring Her Majesty's lifetime of service and by recognizing the contributions of our citizens. Your dedication and years of service mirror the decades of Queen Elizabeth's service to the Commonwealth.
Along with your award this evening, each recipient will also receive a commemorative pin to mark the Jubilee occasion. En plus de votre prix pour service bénévole, chaque récipiendaire ce soir recevra une épinglette commémorative marquant le jubilé de diamant du 60e anniversaire de du règne de la reine Elisabeth.
I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Mr. Brian Beattie, Director, Citizenship Branch in the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration. Thank you for being here and for celebrating with us tonight, Brian. Please stand and be recognized. And also with us tonight is Carol Law from the Ministry's Regional Office here in Toronto. Thank you, Carol, for celebrating with us. Please stand. The broadest and perhaps the most meaningful definition of volunteering is doing more than you have to because you want to, in a cause you consider good. Ralph Emerson captured it well when he said, "The only true gift is a portion of thyself."
Mesdames et messieurs, c'est en donnant de votre cœur que nous donnons un peu de soi-même, avec amour, bonté, joie, compréhension, sympathie, tolérance et pardon.
It is now my privilege to introduce our guest speaker this evening, Patty Bowen. Patty is the Executive Director at the St. Felix Centre, a community centre located here in downtown Toronto. Prior to joining St. Felix, Patty was the President of Volunteer Canada. Her vision and hard work helped to establish Volunteer Canada as a leading organization of is known for her strategic thinking on the role of volunteers in Canadian society and has been consulted regularly by governments and corporations. She was recognized by the Canadian Red Cross for her outstanding achievement in the voluntary sector during the International Year of Volunteers in 2001. Her dedication is fueled by her passionate belief that volunteers can and do change the world. I think Patty knows just a little bit about what it means to give back. And again, like you, she continues to share her gifts, finding ways to make her community just a little better place in which to live. Ladies and gentlemen, Patty Bowen.
Thing. 2001 seems like a long time ago. Malheureusement, je vais faire tout ça en anglais parce que mon français est terrible. Je m'excuse. Good evening, everyone. I'm really honored and delighted to be here with you this evening. Such a simple thing to do, you know, to say thank you to someone. And yet, like I used to say to my kids when they were little, you can never say please or thank you too much. So please, all of you volunteers, do know how much your gifts and your contribution are helping to build a better, kinder, more generous, and more active Ontario. And of course, thank you. I thought you might be interested in just a couple of facts about volunteering in Ontario, and a little glimpse into the numbers behind the very human phenomenon that you are part of. I don't know if you know, but 13.3 million people volunteered in Canada last year, 5.2 million of those in Ontario. And together they contributed 2.1 billion hours of time, which is equivalent to just over 1 million full-time jobs. I think that's amazing. But here's the fact inside those facts that I find the most interesting, which is that just 10% of all those volunteers do more than half of all the hours, which means that 1 million people volunteered 1 billion hours, while the other 1 billion hours was done by more than 12 million people. And each one of the 10% contributed an equivalent of 10 weeks of full-time work to their volunteering. And I'm going to hazard a guess that most of the people in this room are one of these super volunteers. And the statistics tell us a little bit about people like you too. Generally speaking, Ontario super volunteers are defined by two major characteristics: wisdom and faith. The stats tell us that people who volunteer the most time are generally higher educated, thinking people. People who understand that life has to be lived more than just for yourself or for your family. And people who volunteer the most time indicate that they are motivated by faith. Usually, not always, they are participants in formal religion. And we know that in every mosque, temple, synagogue, and church of this country, people reflect and pray and talk about bigger ideas, such as compassion and generosity, love, and service. And then, as these statistics show, they go out and put those ideas into action as volunteers. You know, I'm a clergyman's daughter, and I spent my whole life listening to stories. As a Christian, some of those stories came from Jesus, who as a rabbi preached many of his ideas using parables. And because my dad was also a history professor, a lot of the stories had nothing to do with religion, but were almost always about people and what they do and why and how. So I wanted to bring my remarks to a close tonight by telling you two of my favorite stories, which I think say as much about the power of volunteering as any of those statistics I've just given you. At St. Felix Center, we're a small grassroots charity, and we serve the homeless, and we have about 120 who come in for lunch every day. And one day, Elizabeth, one of our volunteers, was talking to some of the guys, and she was telling them that we were going to be closed on a certain day. And these two, Darryl and Scotia, are, shall we say, characters. And they were well-lit characters on this particular day, and not feeling very much Daryl and Scotia were having a great time, and Elizabeth was telling them they were going to be closed, and so maybe on Monday you could go to the Scott Mission. Can't go there, Elizabeth, we can ban from there. And she said, well, what about the Good Shepherd? We got kicked out of there 6 months ago. She rhymed off a bunch of places. And finally she said, guys, I don't understand it. You've been kicked out of all those places, but when you come to St. Felix Center, you're so good. Elizabeth, says Daryl, you're a volunteer. You should know. This is St. Felix Center. You're one of the famous St. Felix Center volunteers. And everyone knows. You don't mess with a volunteer. He didn't actually say mess. My second story dates back to a time when I was working with young people who had been in the foster care system. And I was at an event one day, and a young woman stood up at the gathering, and she told a story I will never forget. She was raised on a reserve, and her mom was an addict and unreliable. And as a result, she was in and out of foster care for her whole life. But she had a homework tutor in her high school, a volunteer, who met with her every week, and sometimes more than once a week, to help her with her homework and eventually to talk about school and boys and her troubles and her mother and what she might do with her future. Her life was hard, and she got bounced around a lot. But she said, as she spoke to a room of kids who had been in care, you could have heard a pin drop, there was one constant, steady light in my life, inside some days that got pretty dark. And that was Mary, my tutor. And because of her, she went on to university, finished with honors, and eventually attended law school and became a lawyer, and went back to that reserve to help the people she had grown up with. Because of one volunteer,